Throughout history, there have been moments where a single decision or action has had consequences far beyond what anyone could have imagined. These aren't just errors. They're monumental miscalculations that shape the world in profound and often tragic ways. So let's dive into the top 10 worst mistakes in human history, exploring how they happened, what went wrong, and how they changed the course of history forever. Number 1. The decision to drop the atomic bombs in 1945. In August of that year, as World War II was nearing its end, the United States made the fateful decision to drop atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This unprecedented action led to the immediate deaths of over 200,000 people, most of whom were civilians, and left lasting radiation effects. While the bombs forced Japan's surrender, they also unleashed a new era of warfare, one where the destruction of entire cities in seconds became possible. The moral and ethical implications of targeting civilians have been hotly debated ever since. Moreover, it set off a global nuclear arms race, leading to decades of Cold War tension and the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation. The decision to use such a devastating weapon has left a permanent scar on the collective human conscience. Number 2. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, imposing heavy reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions on Germany. The treaty was designed to prevent future conflict by weakening Germany, but it instead fostered deep resentment and economic hardship. By punishing Germany so severely, the Treaty of Versailles created a breeding ground for nationalism and extremism, paving the way for Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Rather than securing peace, the treaty's harsh terms sowed the seeds of World War II. It's a classic example of how short-term thinking and diplomacy can lead to long-term disaster. The failure to strike a balance between justice and reconciliation turned what was supposed to be a peace settlement into a prelude to the deadliest conflict in human history. Number 3. The invasion of Iraq in 2003. In that year, the United States led a coalition to invade Iraq, based on the belief that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and had ties to terrorist organizations. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found, and the invasion led to a prolonged conflict that destabilized the region. The invasion was based on faulty intelligence and a misunderstanding of the region's complex political dynamics. Toppling Hussein without a clear plan for what came next led to chaos, sectarian violence, and the rise of extremist groups like ISIS. The conflict not only cost hundreds of thousands of lives, but also drained resources and damaged the credibility of the United States on the world stage. The decision to invade Iraq is now widely regarded as one of the most significant strategic blunders in recent history, illustrating the dangers of acting on incomplete or inaccurate information. In 1986, during a late-night safety test at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, a reactor exploded, releasing massive amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The disaster was a result of a combination of design flaws and human error. The Chernobyl disaster was preventable. The test that led to the explosion was poorly planned and executed, with operators ignoring safety protocols. The subsequent failure to properly manage the disaster and the Soviet government's attempts to cover it up worsened the situation, leading to widespread contamination across Europe. The long-term health and environmental impacts are still felt today. Chernobyl is a stark reminder of the catastrophic potential of nuclear power when safety is compromised, and it highlighted the need for transparency and accountability in managing such powerful technologies. In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million, which at the time was considered a fair deal for what was seen as a remote and largely worthless piece of land. The transaction was nicknamed Seward's Folly after U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward, who negotiated the purchase. Russia's decision to sell Alaska is often viewed as one of the greatest real estate blunders in history. Alaska turned out to be rich in natural resources, including gold, oil, and gas, which have since generated immense wealth for the U.S. For Russia, it was a short-sighted decision driven by immediate financial concerns and a lack of foresight. The The sale is a perfect example of how undervaluing land based on surface appearances can lead to monumental regret once its true potential is realized. In 1994, in the span of just 100 days, an estimated 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were brutally slaughtered in Rwanda. Despite warnings and the presence of UN peacekeepers, the international community largely stood by and failed to intervene effectively. The world's failure to prevent or stop the Rwandan genocide is one of the gravest moral failings of the late 20th century. The genocide was not a sudden, unpredictable event. It was a meticulously planned campaign of extermination. The lack of decisive action by the international community, particularly the United Nations, not only allowed the genocide to unfold, but also undermined global commitments to prevent such atrocities. The consequences were devastating for Rwanda and highlighted the dangers of inaction in the face of mass violence. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after launch, killing all 7 crew members. The disaster was caused by the failure of an O-ring seal in one of the rocket boosters, which had been identified as a risk but was not addressed due to pressure to maintain the launch schedule. The Challenger disaster was a tragic result of prioritizing schedule over safety. Engineers had expressed concerns about the O-rings in cold weather, but these warnings were overruled by management eager to avoid delays. The catastrophe not only resulted in the loss of lives but also set back the U.S. space program and led to a loss of public confidence in NASA. It's a sobering example of how ignoring expert advice in favor of practicality can lead to irreversible consequences. The Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people in Europe. In the midst of the chaos and fear, Jewish communities were scapegoated and accused of causing the plague, leading to widespread persecution and massacres. The irrational persecution of Jews during the Black Death was driven by fear, ignorance, and deep-seated prejudice. Instead of addressing the true causes of the plague, poor sanitation, lack of medical knowledge, and rat infestations, society turned to violence against an innocent minority. This not only compounded the tragedy, but also entrenched anti-Semitism in Europe for centuries. The mistake lies in how panic and superstition can lead to the targeting of vulnerable communities, causing immense suffering on top of an already dire situation. The Enclosure Acts allowed wealthy landowners in England to consolidate and privatize common land, which had previously been used by local communities for grazing, farming, and other essential activities. This process forced many rural families off their land, leading to increased poverty and urban migration. The Enclosure Acts are a textbook example of how economic policies can have devastating social consequences. By prioritizing agricultural efficiency and profit for the few, these acts uprooted the lives of countless people, leading to widespread displacement and hardship. The surge of displaced workers into cities fueled the Industrial Revolution, but also created the overcrowded, unsanitary living conditions that plagued industrial cities. The mistake was in valuing economic gains over the well-being of the population, leading to long-term social inequalities that would take generations to address. The Library of Alexandria, one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world, was a center of knowledge and scholarship. Over time, it was destroyed, whether by fire, neglect, or deliberate acts, resulting in the loss of countless works of literature, science, and philosophy. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria represents one of the greatest losses of knowledge in human history. The library was a repository of the collective wisdom of ancient civilizations, and its loss set back human progress by centuries. It's a profound example of how fragile cultural and intellectual achievements can be, and how easily they can be lost through conflict, carelessness, or neglect. The mistake was not only in the act of destruction, but in the failure to recognize and protect the value of shared human knowledge. These stories aren't just about historical blunders. They're about how the choices we make, both good and bad, can echo through time. Understanding these mistakes helps us learn from the past and hopefully avoid making similar ones in the future. But what do you think? Did we miss any critical mistakes? Or do you have a different take on these events? If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's biggest oops moments, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our community. We've got plenty more fascinating and sometimes cringeworthy tales lined up for you. And hey, if you think we got something wrong or have a different perspective, drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going because history is always more fun when we share it together.